Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is responsible for one of the Air Force's greatest contributions to our national defense in the joint fight of the 21st century, global mobility. You know, I think we've heard so much about the history over the last day and a half and the total force and the success of the total force. And I will tell you, as an aviator who experienced it personally, I think the vanguard of that total force was the mobility forces of the United States Air Force. From the first days of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, when the tanker community and the 130 community and the C-141 community, and later the C-17 community, and later conflicts, just fought seamlessly to get the job done for America and get critical equipment to the soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen overseas. It is indeed an honor to introduce the commander of today's Air Mobility Command, whose job is much more difficult, but is done much more professionally and successfully today than we even had back in those early days. It is our honor, my honor, to introduce General Darren McDew. Sir.
Thank you very much. I'm quite honored to be standing here, and I learned a couple of valuable lessons. One, you don't follow H.R. McMaster. Two, you don't walk down the aisle with a tall man or two tall men and look really little. I don't even think the photographers could even find me in the picture. So luckily, my ego, I guess, will have to get past all of that. Thank you, General Dunbar, for that kind introduction. Thank you, the association, for allowing me to have this chance to be with you here today. No other organization could bring together such an impressive gathering of not only guardsmen but leaders. General Grass, great to see you here along with my good friend General Clark and General Tonini. I am really, really humbled to be here. One and all, good morning. I think it's still morning for a little while longer. Now, I do realize that I'm the last thing standing between you and lunch. And I know my stomach is starting to growl, but I have a couple things I would like to share with you. One really big message, a few smaller items of discussion, but ultimately the real reason I'm here is to hear your thoughts and get your questions. I put that right up front in my speech just in case there's aviators here and I want to give you time to think. So you're warned that at the end of my presentation, there will be a Q&A session, so start thinking now. This is a unique venue for me as well because it's not often that I get to speak to such a large gathering of guardsmen and also address a joint audience. So I've got to begin something that gives me some street cred here. You know, there's not all that much difference between us here in the Air Force and the Army. In fact, every time I go home, either to Virginia or to Georgia, most of my relatives still think I'm in the Army too. I've been trying to convince them that there are other branches of the armed services besides the Army, but I can't quite seem. As a matter of fact, when my grandmother passed away, she probably still thought I was in the Army. But the most important point is that we have more things in common than we have separate us. One of which is we have all decided to take an oath to support and defend. And we have devoted ourselves to a profession and a life, for many of us, of service. And for that, I want to begin the biggest message I have for you, and that is thank you. To each and every one of you for what you do every single day, what you have done over this last 13 years of war, and what you will continue to do, not just for our nation, but for your respective states. I have a deep appreciation for what our nation's soldiers do as well. You see, I'm a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute. There are a couple people that have heard of the place. I may be the only Air Force general officer that can claim to have once been a corporal and have commanded a regiment. Now, of course, it was a small regiment in a small school in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, but I bear that honor proudly. I'm also one of the few that and I brag often that I wear an Army Commendation Medal, and I don't actually have an Air Force Commendation Medal on my uniform. My Army Com was presented by the 82nd Airborne Division Commander, and I also wear that proudly. During my time as a cadet, I learned to sing Army jodies and bark like a ranger long before I knew what the Air Force is about. And I probably am still better at Army command drill and ceremonies than I am about Air Force, but that's another story for another day. Now, despite what my family believes, I am actually an Air Force Airman. And back in May, General Welsh handed me the flag and allowed me to become the 11th Commander of Air Mobility Command. As you know, in this role, I'm responsible for about 130,000 total force airmen that deliver rapid global mobility every single moment of every single day. It is a core Air Force function, and it enables our nation to project power anywhere in the world. I've been in command for just under 4 months, and in that time, I've met dozens of tags, and most of them didn't say bad things to me. Better than that, I've met many, many phenomenal airmen. I've had a chance to visit 8 Guard bases in my first 100 days. I've seen our airmen and soldiers doing amazing things. As you know, Guardsmen deploy overseas every day to support our nation with air mobility. In addition to regular deployments, the last 2 Directors of Mobility Forces, and that's one of the key developmental positions I have in Air Mobility Command, they have been Guardsmen, General Dave Fountain and General Tim Fry. It's one of the biggest billets we have, and we routinely rotate that through all the components to get the best experience to the fight. And I'm agnostic to the component. I want competence. Back at Scott, I get a chance to work closely with Major General Todd Kelly from the wonderful state of North Carolina, and Brigadier General Steve Berryhill from the great state of Alabama. He makes me call it that. It is also a way that we try to keep connected to our total force. Every day, our total force airmen are called upon to support soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen that put the global in global reach, vigilance, and power. Without it, we would be a wonderful North American-based force. You can't get very far without mobility. Today, our nation's total force mobility airmen are executing nearly 600 sorties. They're conducting airlift and air drop, air refueling, and getting the joint partners and coalition partners airborne and flying urgent aeromedical evacuation missions, which is, I think, the stolen gem of this conflict. Some of those airmen also remain stationed all around the world, maintaining our global enterprise, those important nodes that allow us to have that aircraft flow everywhere we need it. They make it look easy, but it's a complex business, and we're judged, rightfully so, by how well we meet the timelines of our customers. We have to maintain dozens and hundreds of relationships with nations and agencies worldwide to guarantee the support and overflight we need at a moment's notice. And we can never rest. We deploy, redeploy, and sustain warfighters in every region of the world and respond to assist victims of natural disaster and conflict whenever and wherever the need arises. The only reason we can pull all that off, the only way we can continue to meet that need anywhere, every day, is because our Air Force figured out decades ago that a total force team is the key to success. Only through combined efforts of an active duty, Guard, and Reserve can we continue to meet our nation's demand for unrivaled air and space cyber power. Although the Army National Guard holds the distinction of being the oldest component of our nation's armed forces, the Air Guard shares its birthday with the formation of the Air Force as a separate service back in 1947. Seamless integration of that total force remains a priority for our Air Force and me personally today. Guardsmen have led, served, flown, and fought alongside their active duty components in every major conflict and relief operation our country is engaged in ever. Guardsmen operate the same systems, fly the same aircraft, deploy to the same locations as their active duty counterparts. They do it so well that you don't know the difference, nor do you care. unless you spot the patches on an airman's uniform, or perhaps you notice that large state flag in the back of the airplane, or flying over tents in an undisclosed location in Southwest Asia. One of the reasons the Air Force has been so successful with total force integration is the establishment of associations. We've been in that business since 1968, since Norton Air Force Base in California formed the first association with 141s. We've gotten very good at it. In the 46 years since, we have focused on strengthening and codifying those relationships. The demand for mobility is insatiable. Today, the total force is vital to every single thing we do. Now, I'm a bit biased, but I think AMC does it better than anybody else in DoD, and I'm personally a huge fan of the total force. Today, AMC has 18 associate units operating multiple airlift and air refueling airframes with plans to activate more. Part of our commitment to the total force means we don't pass along the old toys to the reserve component. Our aircraft bed down always includes Guard and Reserve bases, and there's no better example than our plan for the KC-46. McConnell may be the first base, but it's already operating with an association. We just announced that Pease Air National Guard Base will be the second base, also with an association. That is no accident. We're going to expect and rely on Guardsmen to help us write manuals, to test and evaluate the aircraft, and to crew this capable airplane every single step of the way. Nothing else is acceptable. Now, back 100 years ago, when I was a C-130 wing commander at Pope in Fayetteville, North Carolina, we were flying the oldest C-130s. Some people seem to forget that. We were flying E models. I definitely wanted C-130Js when they were coming online. The first C-130Js did not go to Pope. We sent them to Guard and Reserve bases, with the first arrival in February of 1999. The first active duty unit wouldn't receive a C-130J until 2004, 5 years later. It was the right call, and we must continue to make the right call for the right reasons. Our Guard and Reserve airmen maintain the same capabilities as our active duty airmen, and we allocate aircraft based on operational suitability. It isn't just the active duty that gets the cool toys. In terms of the airlift fleet, 50% of our C-5s, 20% of our C-17 strength resides in the reserve component. We entrust 71% of our nation's C-130 capability to the reserve component. In fact, the Guard alone maintains nearly half of our nation's C-130 and KC-135 capability. And we may increase those ratios. Within our command, we also seek new ways to balance the challenges of the worldwide military service that the dual role of federal and local responsibilities. We have empowered our mission forecasting capability to anticipate mission surges. When we surge today, we will ask for volunteers from the Guard and Reserve. And what we've done in the past sometimes was to get the volunteers, and if the surge didn't materialize, we would say, thank you for your interest in national defense, and we might not employ you. That's not the right way to operate. So what we've changed it to do is when we get that surge today, we will honor that commitment. And if it means standing down an active duty unit for a few days, then that's what we'll do. If we make a promise, we will keep it. Not every single active duty airman understands what it means to make that commitment and how important it is when a Guardsman volunteers to be able to honor that commitment to their employers as well. Well, these associations we've developed help us build that knowledge and help us build that experience and help us build the most important part of that, and that's trust. And that trust between components is at the local level. And they also, those associations, build better utility of aircraft. As I said earlier, I'm a huge fan, and you'll see that play out over the couple dozen years that I'm the Air Mobility Command commander. Also, when the mission success depends on rapid response, the capability to draw quickly from any component is vital. In 2011, you guys are familiar with the fact that we had a no-fly zone over Libya. It was rapid, and it was a total force response. Multiple bases, all components responded to the call, sending airmen and tankers to establish and enforce the no-fly zone during Operations Odyssey, Dawn, and Unified Protector. The various tail flashes from the bases participated and we called that wing the Calico Wing. It was the only noticeable difference across the amazing group of Total Force Airmen. And what a picture it was. And, as you can expect, it was a resounding success. It's only one example of many, as Guardsmen have been a constant presence in worldwide operations, but you know that. Total Force Mobility Airmen also supported this month's airdrops and airstrikes in Iraq. As airstrikes increased, the demand for air refueling to sustain them, Guardsmen were some of the first to respond, keeping tankers in the air while active duty crews and mobilization approvals were coordinated. Meanwhile, C-130s and C-17s airdropped 114,000 meals and 35,000 gallons of water to refugees. Total Force Airmen planned, sourced, generated, and operated those sorties, delivering life-saving supplies and enabling lethal strikes. That is air power. And just as, yeah. And just as we go to war as a total force, so do we face what we're going to be facing over the next few years. Challenges together. We operate in a complex and unpredictable world. And as the provider of global mobility, we must remain disciplined, agile, and ready for anything. We don't always know where the next crisis will occur, but we know there will be one. Recent events have required us to overcome the vast distances of the Pacific, the congested and contested airspace of Central and Southwest Asia, and insufficient or non-existent aircraft support across the continent of Africa. Mobility Airmen offer a wide range of options to our nation and combatant commanders, but they must remain ready to do so in virtually any part of the world versus any threat. As a total force team, Mobility Airmen are extremely effective. Our challenge now is to be just as efficient. The Budget Control Act of 2011 brought with it a looming threat of sequestration and what has been called arbitrary budget cuts. As we rapidly approach the next fiscal year, our resources will have to work within the boundaries of the resources we're given to maintain some semblance of balance and readiness. Our forces have always got to be able to answer the call, and so efficiency is going to be as important to maintain effectiveness. We have an obligation to ensure every single taxpayer dollar is well spent. But we have a greater responsibility to ensure that we can engage and overcome any threat our nation must face. It comes down to this. We have some tough decisions to make, and not just short-term decisions that avoid the larger issues at stake, but the more difficult, far-reaching, long-term positioning decisions that may be unpopular in the near term, but ultimately better for our nation and our continued viability. I refer to it simply as playing chess versus checkers. We're very good as a nation at playing checkers. Chess takes a little bit more strategy. Our nation will continue to turn to us to deliver rapid global mobility anywhere, anytime. We must determine the core capabilities we need to answer that need and find the best ways across the total force to maintain them, particularly as Air Force force management starts to nick away at our force structure in the active duty, and it begins to impact our active duty airmen. We will continue to turn to the Guard to preserve some of the capabilities. It may involve partnering units along the lines of an association, or it could mean transferring capabilities completely to the reserve component. Similar to how we deal with MAFs, the firefighting systems today, and hurricane hunters and aerial spray in our vaunted LC-130s. These systems operate solely in the Guard and Reserve, and I can sense some others that might be better fits to be in the Guard and Reserve. We should care more about how quickly a capability can be brought to bear and less about where it is parked. Aircraft can mean the difference between success and failure, and lives saved or lives lost. That's part of why we will continue to pursue associate units as part of our total force integration. Easier access to trained and highly disciplined airmen and the aircraft they fly is critical. But so is ensuring that those aircraft are ready and fully capable when we need them. We've got a couple of issues that you're probably going to ask me a question or two about, that we're going to have potentially some very beautiful C-130s that will be wonderful looking static displays at the end of the day if we don't get to acting. The KC-46 is one of the Air Force's top acquisition priorities. It's a national asset that will serve the needs of our joint and coalition partners for 50, 60, potentially 70 years. It will bring key efficiencies and universal air refueling and operational flexibility. But we won't be able to bring the full weight to bear even when we get all of the ones we're programmed, which is 179. It will still not be the foundation of our air refueling fleet. We're still going to be flying the KC-135 for decades. It will remain the backbone of our air refueling fleet. At the same time, though, we need to look forward. And what is beyond the KC-46? What does KC-Y and KC-Z look like? What technologies and new capabilities will they incorporate? Will they have a reduced crew? Will they have no crew on board? Will this new venture 20, 30 years down the road usher in an era of large, remotely piloted aircraft? I think it should. We need to be thinking, because 30 years from now, if all we can still think about is how many crew members we can put in an airplane, we're not thinking the right way. We must also forge our strategy for both strategic and tactical airlifters. The C-5 and C-17 are currently meeting everything we need them to meet, but what's next? We need that next development. The venerable C-130, for fans of freedom, baby, have recently passed the 60-year mark, but still continue to fill our nation's tactical airlift needs. But how do we keep it modernized and ready to fly in any environment, to include the congested and highly regulated air traffic control airspace both here and abroad? The answers to these recapitalization and modernization issues will not be solved in isolation by any one component. They must be coordinated across the active Guard and Reserve to ensure the total force can collectively maintain the capabilities our nation requires. Now, as soon as we get a budget, whenever that happens to be, I'd like to invite you to come with me and let's design the future together. Not in one headquarters, but together in one headquarters. Across all of our portfolios and everything we do, we must continue to leverage the innovation of our service members. As we develop the systems of tomorrow we still have to have the creativity and the great ideas that come with our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. We've got to find a way to harness the power of science and technology. We must cultivate the talent, because we still find a way to recruit and retain the greatest America has to offer across all of our service components. But we can't take it for granted that they'll always be there. And we can't take for granted that they'll grow up with all the things we need them to have unless we provide it. We have to find new ways of looking at a military career. The continuum of service options have got to be further explored. There is goodness in that. Can you think of the day when a lieutenant comes on active duty or comes into the Guard and Reserve and can move across components and serve a full career that meets both his community needs, his or her community needs, and family desires and wants? Why can't we get there? The power is in the total force to help us prepare for this uncertain future. Our nation will always have needs, and we have to be there to answer. It is more than just taking advantage of increased manpower to get the mission done. It means understanding and maximizing the unique strengths and perspectives of each component to create that stronger service. Guardsmen are more than just well-trained, fully capable airmen and soldiers. They bring the experience of their own diverse careers in service of our nation, their states, and their communities. and often bring a civilian parallel success. You are invaluable to the link to communities that we depend on and rely on for support. As a military within a democracy, the support of the public is the very basis of our service. Because less than 0.5% of the American population serves in the military, preserving that link becomes more difficult, but no less important. As citizens that also serve as airmen and soldiers, you're part of the fabric of the communities you live in. The example you set is immeasurable. You provide awareness of what we do. You inform the constituencies, and sometimes more directly, the senators and congressmen. That information, that messaging guides the national debate. And it's not lost on this airman, and it isn't lost on our nation's leaders. Our future as an organization is shaped by many of those decisions that you frame. NGAUS helps to bring your voices together to advocate for us. Recent messaging by NGAUS has greatly assisted our efforts to inform Congress about the C-130 modernization problems we're facing. You can do things that I cannot. Thank you. Again, we must make tough decisions, even when they aren't popular, and work together to get to yes. No is easy. Any junior staffer can say no. It takes a toughened leader to get to yes, and we need your leadership in the days, months, years ahead. We will continue to rely on you to excel in those capabilities that are vital to our nation and best served by the unique strengths of a Guardsman. You provide unmatched civil support. Everything from a presidential inauguration to responding to security relief and rescue operations to, you name it, hurricanes, and I'm sure right now, earthquakes in California again. Your impact here at home in 13 years of ceaseless homeland defense. We also benefit from what you do around the world. You're reaching out to 74 nations right now in state partnership programs. Those relationships pay dividends not just today in the thank yous you received, but greater dividends down the road. And I can't operate without the good wishes that you're developing in places where we need to land an airplane. You're uniquely suited to meet some of our nation's most important needs, and we will keep on relying on you. Probably sometimes more than you have time to give. I'm always amazed at how much you continue to give. Now, before the rumble of your stomachs and mine completely drown me out, let me leave you with a couple of final thoughts, and then I really want to hear from you, and I've given all the aviators a chance to think, so I'm hoping to get a couple of good questions. AMC provides our nation with rapid global mobility. It's a difficult business, but it's impossible without the total force. Even in an uncertain future, that demand isn't going away. Our nation will continue to turn to us to move our people, equipment, and supplies quickly, anywhere without delay. And AMC will continue to turn to the Guard and Reserve to make it happen. As we face the challenges ahead, we will overcome them together by deciding the best way forward for our nation and the communities we serve. We must leverage the unique strengths and perspectives of an incredible total force to remain the agile and ready force our nation must require. But if you remember nothing else from the time I spent with you, remember this one thing, that an airman who is proud to be part of your team stood up here today and said thank you. He said thank you for your service and for shaping the future of the world's finest armed forces. And for the things you do that go unrecognized every single day, he said thank you again. For all the things you do for your nation and your states and the communities you live in and serve, thank you very, very much. Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have time for 2 questions for General McDew. The microphones are open.
Yes, sir. Reed from Wyoming.
Next question. Hey, Cease, where are you, man?
I'm all the way back to the right.
Okay. I would say good to see you, but I can't quite see that far anymore.
Okay. Well, this is an unpaid political announcement, but I've had the honor and privilege to work with this guy and for this guy, and he's the real deal. So thank you for your service and what you're doing. Sir, you still look good in blue. And give Evelyn a hug for me if you
I sure will.
Okay. The question is, when I left the play about 4 months ago, and I missed those talks that we used to have, is my concern of the active duty divesting H-model expertise and the possibility of either a dual qual or less obstacles of going back and forth. I know it was talked about, what do we do with the NAVs and the engineers? I think the reserve and the guard could help with that as far as progression. And also I'm concerned about, the recent activation of guardsmen to have to go train third world country in the H model. So what has progressed, if anything, as far as being able to make sure that the active duty has skin in the game in the H model?
Well, that's a great question, Cease, and again, thank you for your 40 years of service, and I do miss you, my friend. One of the things, we have opened our aperture, at least on my staff, on how we look at that very question. When the question first came up, my staff told me, well, we can't possibly do that. I said, why not? We have got to look at a different way to provide continuity. For one thing, we're going to be out of the H model business for a number of reasons on the active duty side. The greatest of which is that we took the H models that we had on active duty and moved them to cover flags in the Guard and Reserve. And when we turned around and looked at how we got there, all of a sudden we noticed we're down to 27% C-130s on the active duty, and we're almost out of C-130s on the active duty, which means we no longer have the capability to work two weapon systems, the J model and the H. But I don't think we cannot have someone go leave the active duty, go serve with a Guard unit, and come back, and we can find a home for them. That's one of the things I need you to come to the headquarters with me and help me figure out how we do that. The other is, how do we figure out what my headquarters will do to support the H model when we're no longer flying the H model? I think we do a decent job with MAFs, the spray mission and hurricane hunters, but will be more important that I'm completely invested in my headquarters with the C-130H model. And you have my commitment that we will not walk away from it. But we've got to figure out what does it actually mean, and you have to find things that I'm responsible for and hold me accountable for doing them.
Thank you.
Okay.
General McDew, Colonel Cliff James, I'm your back left. Sir, appreciate you coming in and having comments at the conference. I know you're truly one of those commanders who appreciate what the Guard and Reserve bring to the fight. You mentioned several times the KC-46. As you're aware, as active duty units convert to the KC-46, KC-135 simulators will be redistributed to the field. Can you please comment where we are in that decision process and when we can expect an announcement? Thank you.
So why didn't you give these questions to General Welsh yesterday? KC-135 simulators. What's really funny to me is how we're going through as many transitions in the C-130, and not one C-130 community has asked me about simulators. But every KC-135 community has asked me about simulators. The one thing I told my staff is we have under-divested in simulators. There shouldn't be a food fight about simulation. When we drew down some manpower and we put more things in simulation, we just never capitalized simulation. So where we are is I believe we're close to an announcement. We've got an agreed upon position, and it should be any minute now. Here's the funny thing. General Clark and I and our staffs are figuring out, okay, who announces it? I think we have a decision, but we've got to figure out who announces it. And I think we'll get that figured out today, and we should be able to tell you where that is. And we'll make the best decision we can. But what I'd like to do is get some more simulators. We don't have enough simulators. We shouldn't have to arm wrestle each other over a simulator. That's the best non-answer I can give you.
Thank you, sir.
You're gonna move me out now?
I got you.
I'm on a roll now.
You are.
No, thank you very much.